Welcome to Bonnie's Beat. We're coming to you from beautiful downtown Wayne, the studios of Radnor Studio 21. We like to bring you up to date on the latest happenings in politics, academia, the charity world, music, arts, literature, and it just so happened that the guest we booked today is very timely. We have with us Dr. Sharon H. Katz, who is a clinical psychologist, and her company is called Mainline Psychological Resources, and she's got offices in Bryn Mawr and
Exton in Chester County.
Sharon, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's just fortuitous that you were booked to do the show this week. And what can we say about Boston and those two young men and the horror that they've created?
Very difficult situation, Bonnie, to say the least. These kinds of situations cause so much anxiety in people and cause people to really struggle with the uncertainty of a very challenging world today. As far as the young men are concerned, it's difficult to know what their motives were. I think we're still in the process of trying to find that out.
I'm so sorry that one of them is dead.
Well, we can't find out what his motives were and what was going on with him. So that's right. We've lost an opportunity to gather some information. It's difficult. So all we have to do is guesswork at what their motives were. But we want to look at psychological motives. Was there anything about them psychologically that would drive them to do this? Were they influenced politically in any particular way? Were there family issues that might have been bearing down on them that may have resulted in this? Was there some other factor biologically that would make them a little more inclined to do this kind of a thing? What happens with these events is we can't analyze the data after the fact. That's the problem, and we're stuck trying to speculate about what causes something like this. We need to be able to predict this kind of thing, but it's very hard to do so.
To predict, how can you predict
that's
that somebody's going to, I mean, from all the accounts and a lot of you know, older teenagers and classmates of them have been forthcoming saying, well, he was a friend of mine, he was a regular guy. He was on the wrestling team. He was a good student. He did this, 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 and this, and they can't believe it.
And I think that's what creates so much anxiety in people, because we're dealing with that type of uncertainty. Sometimes people like this are outliers. They don't necessarily fit in. They don't necessarily have a sense of belonging. Sometimes they're detached. But it's difficult sometimes to catch that. And I think that's a struggle in our society and in our world today, actually.
But these two don't seem to fit, you know, the patterns for the young man who the mother was homeschooling him from Sandy Hook Elementary.
Yeah, I think we don't know enough. I think we don't know enough about the older one, and I think we still don't know enough about the younger one. So.
I hope they catch him alive, because
we need the information.
Absolutely, we need the information. Well,
you know, what troubles me is how much paralysis there is now in Boston because of this. They have managed to have so much power right now in our country, and it's that it makes me
a whole major metropolis has been shut down. Nobody can leave their house. And I was worried. I said, okay, so they closed the schools, they closed, you know, there's no buses, there's no planes, there's a no-fly, there's nothing. I said, but what happens in the nursing homes? What happens in the hospitals? Suppose somebody had been scheduled for surgery today.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, what happens is we lose our power relative to this kind of a thing. It's a very controlling situation, and it takes over. It really takes over, and it's difficult for people. You know, it's interesting because I was presenting a seminar at a downtown setting a couple of days ago, and it was on stress management. And I was presenting to a group of employees in a company that is located in Center City and not too far from, in a very dense area. And some of the folks in the seminar said to me that they had signed up to run in the Broad Street Run, but they were anxious now about doing that because of what had happened in Boston. So what happens in Boston affects us in other cities and affects the individual at a very profound level. People don't feel safe. People because there's no predictive capacity, people don't feel safe.
How could you possibly predict? I mean, even with all the FBI's resources and profiling and so on, these two would never have come up on the radar.
Well, that's true. And maybe I'm sort of reflecting on what happened at Sandy Hook, because there I think the question of could we have predicted something like this from this young man, that comes up there. And I was having some discussion with some folks about that prediction capability. And we talked about what measures could be put in place to keep an eye on people as they develop, to get a sense of whether people need mental health intervention at an earlier age as they develop, so we can intervene earlier.
Sorry, it's asthma weather.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. In the schools, when the kids come into school, they have audiology tests. They have tests to see visual acuity tests. They have to have certain immunizations, and they have to have a physical before they advance in certain places and go to certain schools and move on to colleges. We can add mental health measures at different points in time along the way that might help us to predict whether somebody needs some intervention at an earlier stage. But that's not currently in place as a regular routine part of assessing somebody.
Excuse me,
Oh, Bonnie, I'm sorry.
there are other problems because in the early 1970s, Pennsylvania passed a law. You can't keep somebody in a mental hospital more than 48 hours unless they sign voluntarily. Well, Sylvia Seacrest.
It's very, very difficult because of people's civil liberties to hold them against their will, even if they need a more contained environment. Now, I think what's lacking are more intermediate levels of care for people who have mental illness, because the model has been a little bit bifurcated between outpatient services and inpatient services, with not enough in the middle, different levels of care where somebody has a partial residential program, or where somebody goes to the home and checks on somebody, something more aggressive. And if we had more intermediate levels of care across a continuum, I think they do have those present in certain circumstances, but I don't think we have enough. Then we would be able to sort of capture the people who need more intensive treatment without requiring the restriction of a mental health facility. And I think we'd be able to supervise them and give them the structure they need, but not take away those liberties.
Well, let's look at your background and see how you came to have mainline psychological resources, and you're certainly passionate about your practice.
Oh, I'm passionate about these issues, actually, too.
So where did you grow up? Where did you go to college?
Absolutely. I grew up in Ballackinwood. I went to Harriton here in Rosemont. I went to University of Pennsylvania. I got a bachelor's degree in psychology and also in education, because I was interested at the time in both. And then went on to the University of Kentucky in Lexington.
Okay. How did you end up in Kentucky?
Well, actually, Kentucky picked me, although it was very appealing. They had a very interesting interview process when they wanted to get to know whether or not I was worthy of their program. They invited us down for a weekend, and we stayed with a graduate student. We each stayed with a graduate student who got to check us out. And we participated in a lot of group exercises so they could see what our interpersonal skills were like. So not only did they look at my undergraduate transcript and my activities and so forth, but they really got a sense of what I was going to be like as a psychotherapist.
Did they
Because
want to know if you could win at chess or badminton or tennis? Was that part of the test?
No, that was not part of the test. But they had us do exercises in a group format to see how, to get a sense of how empathic we were and how well we communicated with other people. And then because we stayed with graduate students, they got to assess what we were like more informally. And then we had a party, and they were checking us out at the party. And I thought it was impressive in terms of their sensitivity to interpersonal skills, so that I would become a good psychologist.
What was your favorite class that you took through all the education you had? You had many years of education.
I did have many years of education.
Years.
I would say, interesting question. I would say my favorite class was probably group psychotherapy. where we learned how to conduct group psychotherapy, but as part of that, we participated in a group.
Oh, there's a
So-
terrific television show. It's wonderful. It's a half-hour show. It's a comedy, but it's
What's
got
it called?
people-
In Session? What's it called?
Yes, I think
In
that's
Session
it. In
or something
Session.
like that. I think
It's adorable. Matthew Perry is the lead character. It is screamingly funny.
Very cute.
And the problems that each one of the people in the group has, just absolutely, it's fantastic. It's very funny, but it's also very compassionate.
That's great.
It
That's
is.
great.
And it helps to do away with the stigma of mental problems, because that's always been something, that our society does not deal with very well.
Does not deal with well. And I think that one of the ways that this is being overcome is that more and more employers and companies are including wellness programming in their services that they offer to employees. So people are starting to overcome this in the workplace because they're calling it wellness as opposed to you have a mental health problem and you need some assistance. And we all can improve and we all can benefit from wellness services. And those are the kinds of things that I've come to provide, going into companies and offering seminars in stress management, change management, leadership resilience.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress going on in corporate America today.
There's a lot of stress going on with individuals. There's a lot of stress within companies. There's a lot of stress in our society.
Every time there's a new CEO, everybody must fear for their job and fear for their security. So, I don't know what you tell them that allays the fears, but that's a big problem today.
It's a big problem. There are a lot of changes that occur at every level within an organization. There are a lot of acquisitions. There are a lot of mergers. I try to help people get a sense of what they can control and what they can't control, and what they can't control, how they cope with that by learning certain types of relaxation strategies so that they can keep themselves chilled, even in the face of anxiety and uncertainty. And then when we talk about the things that they can control, we talk about how to help them do that. Because a lot of people are afraid to make changes and don't know how to make changes. So they need coaching in how to do that and how to adjust to a new CEO.
Do you recommend yoga?
Actually,
I don't do yoga.
The people who teach me most about yoga are my patients. They come in and they tell me about a yoga class and they tell me that they're going, and I say, great, that's terrific, but I don't do that either. So, but I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. So, as well as Pilates.
It's interesting because before we were taping, we were talking about Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, where she was urging women to step forward, be at the table, don't hang back. But do you find that women often have that problem that they stand they stand aside for their male counterparts?
I think that women historically have been taught to be caretakers and nurturers and not instrumental necessarily and not as decisive as men. Now I think things have changed and women are assuming more leadership roles and taking more risks and they're more willing to step up, but often it's challenging for them and it takes a certain extra energy to have to step up, whereas for men I think it's more natural. Now, I did hear somebody speak recently who talked about blending instrumentality and leadership and risk-taking with nurturing and caretaking. That we're making an assumption that, often we make an assumption that you can be one or the other, but you can actually be both. I was reading an article in the New York Times Magazine recently about a professor at Wharton named, I think his first name's Adam, last name Grant, in the Wharton School. And he talks about, or the article discusses how important giving is to him.
It was an interesting
and
article.
I thought it was a very interesting article because we so often associate giving with a feminine characteristic or a womanly characteristic. And here he bases so much of what he does, and he's done a lot of research in organizational psychology and workplace effectiveness. Here he's a great giver. And I think there's a book coming out called Give and Take that was mentioned in the article. And I think he might be a good model for us and lead us into a concept of combining both nurturance and caretaking along with being instrumental and risk-taking, instead of creating
One or
a
the
little bit
other.
of a dichotomy, which I think we've kind of gotten sometimes lost into, and it doesn't make us as creative or as flexible as we can really be.
One of the things that I notice a lot is that even with the new generation of young marrieds, where supposedly the husband and the wife divide the chores, the housekeeping, divide the child care, the wife who's working still does 90% of the housework and the cooking and the shopping and the laundry.
You know, it's interesting. I think that that is true. So now, why does that happen? You know, I actually, and I don't know, I hope women don't get angry at me for this. However, I do think that when it comes to certain types of tasks that are organizational and more detail-oriented, I hate to say this, I think there may be, like, women are better at them. So I think
I'll vote for that.
So I think that maybe one of the reasons women end up doing household management is because they're actually just naturally better at household management. I don't think guys are as good at it. So it seems as though it's getting dumped on the women, but I actually think they're more effective at it.
Is that a result of society's programming women to be homemakers, or
I think
is it genetic?
I think some of the organizational and detail-oriented skills feel to me a little biological. They feel, now, I don't necessarily have a lot of research that I've read that supports that. It's just a feeling that I get. So I'm not so sure it's learned as much as it is more natural. So now I think the chores should be divided, but unfortunately, not always the case.
I heard Gloria Steinem speak recently. She was the keynoter at the Planned Parenthood big event at the National Constitution Center. And they had 500 people there, and they had a lot of men there that are supporters of Planned Parenthood. But she used an interesting word. She kept talking about hierarchical. And she said the same men that believe that women should be subservient, should walk 3 steps behind, should stay home and take care of the kids, should not be at work. She said they're the ones who are anti-abortion, they're the ones who are anti-everything that, you know, that's modern and fair. And of course she talked about the fact that there's still not equal pay for equal work for women and men. So that's, I mean, that fight's been going on for so long, and we're still not there yet.
We're still not there yet, unfortunately. However, I think the youngest generation is starting to develop models of working together in the workplace that is extremely collaborative, much more lateral, less hierarchical. And that model in the workplace may sort of transfer into their personal lives, so that when they get married and when they have kids, they've learned a more lateral, collaborative way of operating with peers that they can now use at home. And in fact, in a lot of workplaces, there's a lot of reverse mentoring going on, where the younger folks are mentoring the older are mentoring the younger. So our workplaces have become extremely diversified in terms of how work is distributed and accomplished. And I think the models in workplaces are changing from so hierarchical to more collaborative. And like I said, maybe that's going to transfer, and these kids who are not married yet, when they do get married, are going to take that model with them into their personal life.
One of the op-eds that you wrote for the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce was about the different generations of workers. Talk about that, because it was very interesting.
Well, our workplace has become very complex, and there are people of different ages providing service in work settings. And the traditionalists are the people who might be, say, 65 and over, who, while they may not have experienced the Great Depression, they have felt some influence through their parents of the Great Depression. And so there's a certain way that they approach work, which is a more formal and in some ways hierarchical method. Then we have the baby boomers that are more likely to be 45 to 65 or 40 to 65. And they
The
have
Clintons.
yeah, they have certain expectations about their work and how they want to accomplish it that is consistent with their history. And then we have what are known as the Gen Xers, which are the young people who are in their 30s. And then we have the millennials, who are the youngest folks in the workplace, not quite the youngest, known as the Gen Yers. And I think what has really happened
is
is
get a job after
if they can get a job, if they can get a job,
that's another
correct.
big problem
It's a big
today.
problem. And you know what's ending up happening is a lot of the kids are living with, they're back living with their parents after having gone to college, maybe even after having gone to graduate school. Now they're back living with their parents, and you know that creates some other problems in terms of family dynamics and making it a little hard for them to exert the independence that they've been used to in college and graduate school, and now they're not having the opportunity to implement it, which is difficult.
What are some of the other topics of the seminars that you deliver in the workplace for corporations?
Well, stress management is hot, certainly, because everybody can benefit from managing stress. Another topic is emotional intelligence, being self-aware, being aware of the other person, being aware of the people in the room, being socially sensitive. And not everybody, even if they're very good at their tasks, not everybody is socially sensitive. So this increases self-awareness as well as social sensitivity, emotional intelligence. Also managing change. Just because of what you mentioned earlier, there's change all around us all the time.
All the time.
And if we can't be flexible and if we can't ride the waves, it's not going to work. So we need to be able to maintain our creativity, our flexibility. Conflict resolution, who doesn't get into conflicts, and how to manage that, which can be challenging for some people. Some people are more confronted than others. Some people are afraid of conflict. Some people don't assert themselves because they're fearful of how they're going to be perceived. They need to be coached to be more assertive and how to communicate in a diplomatic way.
Nobody ever told me I need to be more assertive.
Well, that's good for you. That's great. Very good.
What's your favorite topic for a seminar at a company? Do you have a favorite?
You know, I don't really have a favorite. What makes me enjoy my presentations the most is when the group is open. I like to have a interaction with the people that participate. Like the last seminar that I gave on Wednesday, there were about 55 people in the audience, and people
55.
and people spoke up. I had them do some exercises, and then I had them. I actually asked them what current stressors they're dealing with currently, and they were like, hands up. I mean, they were very happy to share, and that's what makes a fun presentation for me, is when there's a lot of interaction among the participants, because then they learn from me, I learn from them, and they learn from one another. And that's how I like to teach.
If people want to contact Dr. Sharon H. Katz, do we have a number that we're going to put on the screen, or tell us the phone number that they can call?
Sure, you can call me at 484-380-2613.
Say it again slower.
484-380-2613.
And you must have a website. I know.
Well, I actually have an email address.
Oh,
is really the
good.
best way to reach me, drkatz@mainlinepsychological.com.
That's drkatz@mainlinepsychological.com.
Correct.
I love it. What's your favorite television show?
Oh, well, can I say that it's a reality show?
You
Like
can.
me.
I don't watch reality shows, but you
I like Dancing with the Stars and American Idol. I honestly do.
Oh, isn't that
well,
funny?
I'll tell you why. I think I told you this when we met recently. I like to sing and dance, and I wish at some level in another life, I would have done something like that. So I'm watching dancing and I'm watching singing if I'm not doing it myself. So.
Although there are a couple of terrific shows like Glee.
Oh, I like Glee.
Dancing,
I like Glee.
and
also.
Smash, which is brilliant.
Right.
That combines the singing, the dancing, and the acting.
That's right.
But it's also a drama. I like things with a plot.
Oh, I understand that, and certainly the shows that I described don't have
I
plots.
don't watch my hairdresser brings me up to date on all the reality shows, because otherwise I would not have even heard of them.
Well, I'm not necessarily recommending them. They work for me. Everybody's different.
And do you like to read fiction or
Well, right now I'm reading
nonfiction?
mostly fiction. Right now I'm reading Ladder of Years by Ann Tyler, and it's
Oh, she's
kind of
good,
yeah,
Ann
it's an
Tyler.
old book, but
She's good.
I think the theme is interesting. And from a nonfiction perspective, I am in the middle of Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In.
Lean
As
In.
I told you. I also, there's a book by Tom Rath, I think it's R-A-T-H, Strengths Finder, and he discusses capitalizing on your strengths in the workplace, how to identify those, and how to make the most of those, as opposed to trying to rely on your weaknesses, which what's the point of that? So try to develop the things that you're already naturally good at.
What age groups do you deal with your private practice?
In my private practice, it's exclusively adults, typically 21 to 65, and I usually work with people individually, although occasionally I'll work with a couple or an adult child and a parent who's having some conflict.
What kind of problems do you deal with in your practice?
People come in usually when there's some kind of life change.
I mean, Hannibal Lecter's not one of your
No, Hannibal.
patients.
Not yet. Not yet. Hannibal Lecter is not one of my patients. That was a good call. I usually deal with people who are undergoing some kind of a change that's been disruptive in some way, and they're trying to figure out how to negotiate it, whether it be divorce or, sadly, the loss of a family member, personal medical illness or illness in another family member. Sometimes workplace-related stress. Sometimes people come in who are managers or directors who have the responsibility of implementing a layoff. They've been asked by the people above them, to lay off some people in their department.
That
and they
George
have to make
Clooney
decisions.
movie.
Oh yes,
Yes.
that was very
Oh.
difficult. I forget the name. I forget the name of that. But that makes them feel very guilty. Makes them feel like they're letting their team down. It really challenges all of what they've tried to build in their department. So for people at that level, it's very hard on them.
Well, you've got people's lives in your hands.
And that's how they
problem.
feel. They're very responsible.
Yes. Anyway, our guest today has been Dr. Sharon Katz of, I want to get it right, Mainline Psychological Resources, and she's fabulous. So if you have a problem, just call Dr. Sharon Katz, and we'll see you next week on Bonnie's Beat.
Thank you, Bonnie.